This week, the focus is health stigma. We know from prior readings that stigma has important implications for how we communicate about health, including our mental health. In this lecture, you will learn about how we define and characterize stigma, specific ways in which stigmas are present in our health communication, and some serious consequences of stigmatization in health. Stigma is defined as a socialized, simplified, standardized image of disgrace of a particular social group. As you read in past weeks, stigma can be a reason why people wait or hesitate to seek both professional help as well as help from friends and family members. Thus, stigma is a very important topic when discussing health communication in general or how we communicate about a specific health context such as our mental health. When we think about the definition of stigma further, we see that the socialized, simplified, and standardized images are often based in stereotypes or taboos. Stereotypes are formulaic and simplified conceptions of a group and its members. It's essentially a negative belief about a group of people, while a taboo is a prohibited act or condition. When we think about stereotypes or taboos based in the context of mental health, you could draw on some misconceptions that those with a mental illness are mean or violent. We saw examples of this in 2 weeks readings ago about media portrayals of mental illness and health. Considering taboos in some groups, such as the military or Scientology, seeking help from mental health professionals may be considered a prohibited act because of the stereotypes or negative beliefs these groups have toward mental illness. When we consider specific stereotypes or taboos about health, it is important to understand that these beliefs are socially constructed among the members of a culture or group. Thus, social constructions of illness are shared among community members to socialize them as to how they can recognize the stigmatized construct and what the appropriate or normative behaviors are for interacting with the construct. As we will see in a moment, communication of stigma can take many different forms. It is important to remember when we are considering the stigmatization of people's health conditions that it has important implications for health and well-being. Furthermore, caring for a stigmatized person may provide unique challenges above and beyond the health issue. Now let's take a look at the specific ways in which we communicate health stigmas in our messaging about health. The major goal of communication that stigmatizes others is to promote within a community how to recognize those in a standardized population and how to limit this population's access to resources and future interactions. Thus, the three other goals of stigma communication are to include content that quickly gains the attention of those in the community, encourage grouping and stereotyping, and provide reasons and motivations for why others should engage in the devaluation and discrimination of people in the stigmatized group. There are four main types of messages that work to achieve the goals of stigma communication. The first type of message is marks. Marks are the cues used to recognize members of a stigmatized group. The most effective marks facilitate quick recognition, are easy to learn, and trigger emotional reactions that prompt behavioral responses, such as wanting to leave an interaction. For stigmatized individuals, marks may be hard to conceal, and some may associate them with feelings of disgust. Marks that are identified as disgusting are often hard to avoid. They also often result in a moral judgment of the stigmatized person. Marks may be physical characteristics or behaviors of the stigmatized, such as visible obsessive-compulsive behavior, or they may be temporary or permanent symbols attached to stigmatized others. For example, some life-saving medical devices some type 2 diabetics need to wear, or asking students with attention deficit disorder in a class to sit together in the back of the room. In both cases, these marks can generate a social distancing effect, thus achieving the third goal of stigmatized messages. The second type of message cue is labels. Labels are words used to name a stigmatized group and its members. The label signals people to consider the labeled group as a coherent, distinct social entity, and to think about the group's members as similar and indistinct. For these reasons, labeling plays a key role in enhancing and facilitating stereotyping. Labels can also incorrectly link health conditions to one's identity. For example, the sentence, "she was diagnosed with anxiety," separates the diagnosis of anxiety from the person diagnosed. They are not the disease, they were just diagnosed with it. If labels are used, the sentence might sound more like this: "she is anxious all of the time." By using health conditions as social categories, people may be grouped and then labeled by their health condition. The third type of message is responsibility. Responsibility in this context refers to information that is included in messages to imply blame by making attributions about a person's choice or control. In other words, it is meant to argue that those with a stigmatized group make decisions that put the community at risk. Marked, labeled members of a stigmatized group may be thought of as choosing their stigmatized condition due to some personal characteristic. For example, people may attribute one's anxiety to being a result of not being able to relax or calm down. This assumption insinuates that people can choose whether or not to be anxious in any particular situation. So in other words, the notion of responsibility encompasses how much control the person has in experiencing or eliminating their health condition. The assumption of choice and control over one's health has powerful consequences. For example, empathy, which can reduce stigmas, is difficult to evoke for those seen as choosing their labeled condition. This effect can limit the ability of support or the availability of support in one social network. The final type of message is parallel. Parallel refers to information that links the marked, labeled, responsible individuals to a physical or social danger that threatens the community's way of life. An example of this is when we read about the media portrayals of individuals with mental illness as being violent or dangerous. In this case, highlighting the danger evokes fear, and fear is thought to encourage actions to escape from the threat or avoid stigmatized individuals. In addition to understanding how our messages help form, sustain, and socialize health stigma, it is also important to understand how stigma impacts our interactions with others. Interactions that include individuals from stigmatized groups may be stressful and challenging for both the stigmatized and the non-stigmatized. For the non-stigmatized, individuals may experience a tension between wanting to demonstrate humanity and compassion for others who are stigmatized, while also maintaining potential obligations to the larger society, which promotes the devaluing of the stigmatized person. This may result in the non-stigmatized individual feeling uncertain about what to say, discomfort, and anxiety during the interaction. Behaviorally, these feelings may lead to avoidance behaviors as well as shortened interactions with stigmatized peers. Furthermore, these effects are influenced by the level at which the person is stigmatized by society. Second, stigmatized individuals must find ways to cope with these stressful interactions with non-stigmatized others. Those labeled as members of a stigmatized group attempt to cope with the stress of impending devaluation, rejection, and discrimination through three coping strategies: withdrawal, secrecy, and education. Withdrawal is action taken to selectively expose oneself to only those people who accept the conditions associated with the stigma label. Secrecy refers to actions taken to conceal the marks and labeling conditions that could trigger categorization into a stigmatized group. Education is active and intentional disclosure of one's marked and labeled status and providing information about the conditions associated with it. This is done to persuade others to change their stereotypes, to generate acceptance, and to ward off rejection. In the video assigned for week 2, we heard the story of Jordan's high-functioning anxiety. For Jordan, one strategy of managing this anxiety could be to only associate with close others who know about the mental condition and are accepting of it. This would be withdrawal. Jordan could also decide to only engage in interactions where symptoms of the anxiety are not present, as a means of trying to hide the stigmatized condition from others. This would be secrecy. In the podcast, we see Jordan engaging in the third strategy, education. One specific theory, label management theory, addresses how these strategies may be selected by stigmatized individuals through discussions with non-stigmatized confidants. One basic premise of label management theory is that when a stigmatized person shares their labeled condition to a confidant, they become co-owners of that information. In other words, they both share in the knowledge of the disclosure's labeled status, regulation of this knowledge, and its consequences. When confidants share in the consequences of the stigmatized condition, they may experience what is known as courtesy stigma. Through courtesy stigma, the community does the courtesy of extending supporters of stigmatized others the same stigma, thus treating both labeled persons and their supporters as though they have all been labeled. Due to this, confidants may consider the label as stereotypes and potential consequences in similar fashion to those bearing the label. Here we can see that stigma communication impacts both stigmatized and non-stigmatized individuals. That concludes this week's lecture. I look forward to reading your thoughts on the impact of labeling, stigma, and our understanding of mental health conditions as you watch this week's TED Talk video.